By now, all of you know that I'm a huge fan of investment property. I have a bunch of rentals, and so many people ask me, Will, how do you deal with all of those rentals? Today, you're going to find out my secret weapon. First, I'd like to thank our title sponsor, First Access Mortgage. They're Louisiana's first choice mortgage lender for the last 21 years. We are excited to be partnered with them. And for your first home, a vacation home, or an investment property, they're truly your home loan resource. Welcome to another episode of the Will Frederick Podcast, where we talk about real estate, wealth building, money, and life. We are joined by one of the most important people in my world, my rental manager, Emily Canavier. She runs my property management company, Rent Louisiana. When we met, you had, at the time, 10 years of property management experience, right? With over 500 rentals from Tonti in New Orleans.
Yeah.
So you already came with a ton of experience running circles around me. Now we are, at the time, how many did we manage at the time? Do you remember?
When I came on, it was about 44.
44 doors.
Yeah.
And now we're up to 330?
About 330.
330. So, she's good, guys. I'm just going to hand it to her. Thank you, Emily. It's been really good. So we're going to talk about what's involved with property management today, and we're going to share with you some of the things that we've learned over the years. Like I said, Emily's absolutely the pro. I don't even know what's going on in my rentals sometimes. I'm like, I don't know. Let me ask Emily. So that's a really good feeling. When it comes to property management, you have a couple of options. When you buy a rental, you can manage it yourself. I'm going to tell you that it's not worth that. You need to hire a property manager. And of course, I'd love you to hire us. We're going to share with you today some of the things that we've learned so you can manage them yourself. And just some tips and tricks, some things just to kind of pitfalls that go along the way. Emily, let me ask you this. What are some of the objectives that you have when you go into just a rental management with an owner? When you meet a new owner, what are you trying to find out from them?
Basically what their goals are. We want to know what their objective is. Is their objective to just maintain their current property? Are they looking to build their portfolio? Are they looking to make enough money to seek out, more property, or just to bring in additional income, for themselves and for, their future?
Yeah. And one of the reason I love rental property, it's what my show's about. It's building wealth. And I believe one of the best ways to build wealth is investing in real estate. And so Emily has certainly helped me and many, many of our owners do that, because she's very, very insightful, has lots of good advice, and interfaces with the tenants and helps communicate what's going on to the owners, Yeah. So I would say there are 6 steps in determining or in 6 steps to property management. So I'm going to ask Emily a little bit about each of those 6 steps. So the first step, I would say, is determining a fair rental market price. How do you do that, Emily?
So typically what we'll do is we pull, comps on the MLS. Licensed agents have access to, a database that has records, basically. It'll tell them how much a property rents for, what the property is like, how much square footage, how many bedrooms, baths. And it'll also say, if the property was built in a certain year, it kind of just keeps track of all that information. We'll also pull data from, online, simple Google searches. You can look online at any, Zillow, Truly a Realtor. All of those are going to say, oh yeah, we have all these properties listed on our website. So there's a lot of information at, anybody's fingertips that you can pull that information from and kind of just see what's going on in the area. Is there something new? And it really help determine what those prices should be and where they should be at.
And the more you look at them, the more you'll be able to see what those prices are. They naturally come out.
Absolutely.
A big part of marketing is price.
Yes.
You got to make sure. You can have the finest place in the world, but if it's overpriced by even a couple $100, it might sit vacant for months on end. You've seen that.
We do. We tell people all the time, my average where I'll typically start is $1 per square foot. Mm-hmm. That's what we've seen, the average. It's been like that for quite some time. Mm-hmm. Houses, the sale of houses, the prices range. You might sell for 143 a square foot or maybe 150 a square foot, but price per square foot for rental, you're looking more like $1 per square foot.
Okay.
So that's always a good starting point. Mm-hmm. But there's also a lot of things that are involved in that. Obviously, location.
Yeah, location's the big thing.
Absolutely. Amenities, things that they have to offer in the property, school districts, what taxes and insurance are for the property.
Yeah.
Those are all contributing factors. And then, of course, at the end of the day, the owner has to make sure that they're profiting enough.
Right.
Is the investment really worth it if you can only rent the property, if it's a 1,200 square foot house and you're only going to be able to make $1,200, is that even going to cover your mortgage payment?
Right.
You know?
And you've helped several of our owners, right? Don't they consider you a resource? They'll come and say, Emily, what can I get to rent this? And you'll help talk them through that scenario.
Absolutely. I have owners constantly, especially ones that are looking to pick up new property, you know, to add to their portfolio.
Right.
And they'll say, hey, like, is this a good investment? And again, real estate is always a good investment because you're not losing anything. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're going to be able to maintain, you know, you don't want to have to buy a property and then depend on a tenant to be in there in order to make that payment. If you can't afford it on your own, it's probably not the best idea that you're purchasing it. So you're always going to have, not always necessarily, but you have to allow for some vacancy, you know, you're not going to have income. Sometimes you're going to have to put money into the property. So you want to consider all of those things. But I think talking to me and my team about it is really insightful to a lot of our owners to find out if it's a good investment or not.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said your team because you're not managing 330 units by yourself, right?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yeah, you've done a really good job of building your team. So,
thank you.
Yeah. All right. So I would say another step, and again, we're helping advise current owners on managing their own properties. Another step would be that you have to do is market that vacant property for rent.
Yes.
Right. So how do we do that at Rent Louisiana? So what would you advise an owner do?
So we use a bunch of different platforms. Our biggest platform that we have is we actually have a property management software. So our property management software allows us to put information about that property into the system. It tracks your vacancy. It tracks the, you know, square footage, the bedroom count, all of those items that come into it. And then what we end up doing is once we go live with it, we'll come up with a marketing description. We want to attract people to the property before they've even laid eyes on it. So catchy titles, it's a lot of marketing, it's a lot of curb appeal. We'll look at all of those things and come up with a description to get people excited about the property. Why do you want to live here?
Right.
We're trying to meet people's needs and expect their needs before they even know. They might not even know what they're looking for, but we can then kind of turn them, and that's our goal. Yeah. So as far as the marketing aspect is concerned, we list our property on our program. And we currently use a program called Appfolio, which has been phenomenal for us. And then it ports out to multiple different websites. So if you look at Google, you know, just a simple Google search, properties near me for rent, it'll pull up realtor.com. Over 40 different websites in total is what our website or what our program ports out to.
Appfolio will port it out.
Absolutely. Okay. We also, you know, depending on the owner's preference, we can also list that property in the MLS. So if the client is working with an agent, that agent can pull it up at a glance and say, this is all the details that you possibly could need. Yeah. We also have, you know, social media platforms that we'll market on or advertise on. And with a property management company, one of the perks or advantages to just being a regular owner that owns property that's trying to rent it out is tenants might just call our office and say, hey, I'm looking for a property that's available. Do you have anything? And so they might not even know that they're looking for something specifically, but then they call and we're like, we have this might fit your needs. Right. So we're getting those phone calls, like people are seeking out, you know, help, assistance to find a property for rent.
Well, once they know, I mean, they might call you because they know you might have multiple instead of just calling a sign. Somebody puts a sign in their yard. And that's another thing I would say for an owner that's a one-off, you have to be pretty responsive to these tenants. Tenants can be, you know, sometimes difficult to communicate with. We have a couple of leasing agents that are like tasked with doing that. That's their sole job is to get a tenant, pre-qualify them. You have to screen them. Like there's some things involved with that, you know. So what would you say? Would you say anything specific about screening at this juncture, or?
Yeah, I think you know, one of the biggest complaints that I hear from some of my investors when they were managing properties themselves was that they would list their property on like Facebook Marketplace or some type of social media, or they would tell some friends about it. They were getting leads in, especially if it was listed on Facebook Marketplace, they were getting leads, and they're people like, oh, I want it. And then of course, you know, they drop off the face of the earth. You never hear from them again. And then it's like, I missed out on this renter, but were they even a qualified renter? Right. You know,
there's sometimes people are just kicking tires. Right. You need somebody who's a professional and I know as an agent, like with for sale by owners, for instance, people will call a for sale by owner that have no business. They're not ready to buy. Right. They're just like curious. They're tire kickers, I call them. And, but they won't call an agent. So we'll get fewer calls maybe on that house when it's listed than the for sale by owner got but those are real calls.
Right.
They're not actual, and so you need somebody to help screen out and sift out all the garbage, basically.
Yeah.
Not that the people are garbage, but the applicant situation
Absolutely.
might be not that attractive for an owner.
I can tell. I mean, just me. I might be driving down the street and see a for sale by owner sign, and I might call it just to see how much they want for it.
Right, yeah.
Because it might not be listed online, so it's not a a Googleable search where you can just search for what they're asking for it.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, but I might not be interested in buying it.
Yeah,
but I just want to know.
I wonder how much that is.
Right.
Yeah. So, well, what about inspecting? That I would say step 3 would be inspecting and maintaining the property. So that's a responsibility that an owner does carry. They have to maintain the property. They have to inspect the property if they're managing it themselves.
Absolutely.
What does Rent Louisiana do? Do they do like inspections, maintenance? Like, tell us about that.
We do. So our main objective for tenants is, to provide safe, affordable, and clean housing. So we want to make sure, whether the rent is $400 a month or $4,000 a month, we want safe, clean, and affordable housing for people. And the biggest, I think, objective for owners to kind of know is when they're managing a property themselves.
Today's episode is sponsored by Rent Louisiana. This is my property management company that I own, and we're one of the largest property management companies on the North Shore with managing over 300 rentals. So we take away 90% of the headaches for only 10% of the income. Many people want rentals, but they don't want to manage it themselves. Well, this is the solution. Many people have a few rentals, but they want more. They don't want the headaches. This is the solution. Turn it over to us, and we will take those headaches away.
Think about if you even live 30 minutes away, think about the time that it's going to take you to get out to the property just to put eyes on it. What if you get there and the tenant doesn't let you know that they're home? Or what if they say they're going to be home and then they're not? Then you've wasted 30 minutes of your time just getting out there and you can't even put eyes on the inside of the property. And some owners might say, oh, well, I have keys, I'll just go in. Then you're violating privacy and, you could potentially be, risking your own safety because what if they have, somebody there that doesn't expect you,
Right.
So
Yeah.
there's a bunch of aspects to it, and you can contact a tenant and tell them, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be out there, but it's the hassle, and you might have to listen to a tenant tell you, oh, by the way, while you're out here, I'm not going to have my rent for this upcoming week.
Yeah.
They're not.
People got sob stories.
They do. And some of them, are completely legitimate. And we work with people all the time because, our goal is not to just kick people out when they don't have the money,
Not, yeah.
But we want to make sure that they are held accountable. The owner has a mortgage to pay. Just because the tenant, oh, well, I can't pay my rent. Okay, well, maybe the owner won't pay the mortgage, and then what? Then you don't have a place to live.
And that's can be a hard thing as an owner. Like I said earlier, like I'm a nice guy, man. When you got somebody who their kid just broke their leg and they lost their job and they're crying and they're, I mean, I care about people, and it's a lot harder for me as the owner because I have the power to say,
right.
Emily does not have the power to say, oh, it's okay. Like, she's like, hey, this is my job.
Yeah.
I got to do it,
It takes the personalization out of it. So it's not so personal,
That's a big key.
It is. And it's funny because a lot of people ask me, well, how many properties do you own? I don't own any, other than the one that I live in. I don't own rental properties because I do deal with this because I know, and if I did own properties, it would be, I'd hire a management company because it
that wasn't you. Yeah,
I know it would take me out of it because I do. You listen. Everybody has a big heart. You want to help people. You're in this business because you want to provide the safe, affordable and clean housing to people. But what happens when they call you with that sob story? It's like, oh well, I understand, but then they're a month behind.
Can you you probably have an example or several examples of owners that have come to you after, like, really anything that pops into mind?
I do. I actually have two owners in particular. One had a property, just a single property. And this goes to show whether it's one property or multiple properties, property management can always help you because I have this one owner in particular. They tried to rent the house. They got a renter pretty quickly. They were getting, I think, about $800 a month in rent. And then the tenant was tearing it up. They went to do an inspection one day and they found out that there was a daycare being run out of the property, which was, of course, a huge liability.
Yeah,
and so they were like, you can't do this. And of course, they were like, well, how am I going to pay my rent? This is my income. What do I do? So then you're in a sticky situation like, well, that's true. If they can't run their business, out of the house, how am I supposed to pay the rent or collect the rent? And so, obviously they ended up getting that tenant out of there, got another one similar situation happened, you know, wasn't being maintained. They ended up spending a lot of money to get the property fixed up. And then I came in the picture and I met with them and I gave them, you know, after pulling the comps on the area, I came up with a price for them and they were like, I don't know, that seems really high. You know, we had the property rented within 3 weeks and that tenant has lived there for over 5 years.
Wow.
And so with, you know, steady increases.
And what price is that? What price was that at the time? They were getting 800.
They were getting 800. I think now we're right at $1,250 a month.
Wow. Yeah.
So big increase.
But even right away, it was much more than the management
Absolutely.
cost them.
I think it started at
a net win from the get-go.
About $280 more a month that they were profiting.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And fortunately for them, you know, it allowed them to buy other investment properties, you know,
Exactly.
and kind of grow.
Yeah.
And then another example is a gentleman that I manage for. He has multiple rental properties as well. Great guy. He is a nice guy though. And he said, you know, this happened and that happened. The tenants ended up being behind on rent. Each of them, there were 2 properties in particular, a little over $6,000. You know, it was just, they would pay, you know, make a payment, but it wouldn't be a full payment, or they would give money here and there. And then he would send a message like, hey,
hard.
are you going to,
If you're a nice person, gosh, it's really hard.
And you want to help people, you know, you tell them, oh, this happened to my, you know, the tenant saying, oh, this happened to my wife, or this happened to my kid.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, ouch, you know, what do I do? And so when we came in, we obviously, you know, we gave them an opportunity to try to come up with a payment plan. When they didn't stick to that payment plan, it's a lot easier for us to say, we gave you an option.
Right.
Now you got to go.
Exactly.
So we did end up getting them out of the property. And then when we went to do our move out inspection, which is obviously something that we do, the property was destroyed. There was an active roof leak that they didn't report. They had a pet, which was not allowed. The pet had caused damage to the flooring, to the baseboards.
Wow.
The carpets were...
All right, we're not trying to talk people out of rental
I know,
property.
right?
Okay, come on, chill. No, I'm just kidding. No, but this is real life. I mean, it's really what can happen if you have a bad tenant. So it's a real thing.
Yeah.
So and that kind of brings us into step 4, which I would say is collecting rent and enforcing the lease.
Yes.
So you were just talking about, you know, just holding people accountable and then also enforcing the lease terms.
Yes.
So tell us some stories about that.
So with our lease, we one of the biggest important things to know is you can print out a residential lease online.
Absolutely,
You know, you can, I need a lease to type up. The problem is it doesn't always cover everything. Some people think, oh, well, I've thought of this, but have you thought of everything?
Right.
You know, there's always that question. And you can have an attorney draw it up, but then you're paying hundreds of dollars to have them look at a document that can still be technically argued.
Yeah.
You know, so you have to kind of anticipate what needs to be in that lease for you to be able to enforce. So a lot of times owners would have a lease, but it wasn't a very good one. And it would allow tenants, you know, to have more rights or than they actually expected, than the owner actually expected. So with our lease agreement, that's kind of where we start and say, you know.
Well, this is where I say that Rent Louisiana, I mean, each one of these things that you're talking about is a great value, I think. But I remember, you know, my first lease that I ever wrote with anybody, like I would be ashamed to show it to anybody now. But after that first lease, I had to rewrite it because I was like, oh, I missed all this stuff. And then I had to rewrite it again. And I rewrote that lease dozens of times. And each experience I had helped me gain knowledge. And Emily has literally thousands of experiences that contribute to the Rent Louisiana lease.
And then what are you putting in the lease? You know, is it legal? Is it something that we can, you know, so we're keeping
we've taken over owners and we're like, you can't put this in a lease.
You can't put that in there.
You know?
And technically, and you know, the owners can argue, well, they signed it. And that's very accurate, you know, but is it going to hold up in court? Is it really protecting you if it isn't legal to do anyway? So we're constantly keeping up with the new laws, what needs to be done in your property if you're renting it out, because you have to make sure, because there's fines that occur with things like that, and you could lose and potentially have to pay a tenant that might owe you money to stay in a property that you own.
Right.
So it's like, where do you draw the line?
Well, and I'll tell you this too. One thing I want to say, and you brought it up earlier when you said the objective is a safe, clean, and what was the other thing? Safe, clean, and affordable place for a tenant to stay. That's truly knocks on the door of a win-win situation, because as an owner, you want to be providing a value to a tenant, and it's not all about the tenant, but we do want to provide them with a safe, clean, and affordable place to stay. Because guess what? If you can do that, you're going to get a good tenant that's going to stay a long time and build your wealth for you.
Yes.
And we also protect the landlord. It's not just protecting the tenant, but it's good to have a ref in the middle to kind of say, hey, here's what's going on.
And that's what makes property management great, because we're not only looking out for the owner, we're looking out for the tenant too. And I know that might scare owners off, to say like, they're looking out for my tenant, not for me. It's a fine line to walk. You as an owner have the property that you're providing, and therefore we could potentially manage for you. But then you turn around, and if you don't have a tenant that's paying that bill, then you have nothing.
Right.
So it's a very
two-way
fine
street.
line.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, you have to have that win-win situation, So tell me about evictions, because that's step 5, evicting tenants who don't pay rent.
Yeah.
Do you have any eviction horror stories, or
I have a couple. After this many years of doing it, I think with evictions, it's again a gut wrenching thing. You don't want to kick somebody out of the home. Then you worry about if you do have to kick them out, or if you're okay with saying, you know what, they haven't done this, and you've accepted that they have to go. Are they going to trash your property? How are you following up with them as far as how to get your money back? Is there anything that you can do other than, you have to sit in courtroom? It's of course going to cost you court fees, but then you have to take time out of your personal day. And a lot of my investors, it isn't their only job. They have a full-time job. So they don't have the time. They're going to have to miss work to go sit in a courtroom and then argue with the tenant. And what if a tenant comes back with, well, they did this. They said I could do this. Is it in writing?
Right.
Do you have it documented anywhere? It's the biggest... it's kind of fun sometimes to sit in there and listen to these stories, but then other times it's like, man, like
I tell you what, I remember that was the worst day for me when I'd have to go sit in court, because you being there for several hours. They don't let you bring your cell phone, so you can't. All you're doing is sitting there listening to Judge Judy, And I say Judge Judy. The court system is really great. They're very fair-minded. It's always a kind of a validating experience when you're sitting in there. That's why but you hear some crazy stories, and you got to sit there and listen to this foolishness for hours on end, and hopefully your tenant doesn't hire an attorney that creates an issue. And I love that Emily is who goes to court for me now and not me. So that kind of brings us to step 6, which is using a good rental property accounting system. So you need to be able to track your income and expenses for a rental property. Is there any system that you'd recommend, Emily?
I do. So there's obviously a lot of different property management softwares on the market. However, a lot of them will only allow you to use their program if you have a certain amount of properties. You might be really interested in one. You think, oh, this is great. And you turn around and, you have to have 50 properties or 50 doors to even sign up with them. There is one that we used to use, Rentec Direct. Is a good software system, but I do think recently they just updated to where you have to have a certain amount of properties in order to open up with them. I don't know any off the top of my head that are just for 1 to 3. I know a lot of my owners that have just a couple of doors. They'll typically do an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, that's what I used to use. Excel.
But then you're not, are you really tracking everything if you're not sitting there every day, and putting things in? I know Quicken is a good one. They do have a software, you can purchase that just goes on your computer, and you can kind of update and keep your personal items separate from your rental expenses. But in my opinion, if you're not an accountant or you don't think like an accountant, there's a lot of things in there that leave room for mistakes and errors. So,
well, I think y'all can see that Emily's a brilliant resource, and she's got a lot of organizational knowledge that she brings to the table. She's been a great resource for me, and I can't recommend her highly enough. So if you ever have questions about rental management, please reach out to Emily, and we have a lot of good organizational knowledge that we love to share. Part of the purpose of this podcast is educating our people on how to build wealth, how to do that responsibly. We want to talk about real estate, wealth building, money, and life. That's the tagline of the podcast. So a big factor of that is what Emily has brought to my world. And y'all know I'm a big fan of leverage and buying back my time in certain ways. This has been a great example of how there is no way that I would have grown to the level of rental property ownership that I have without Emily. And I know many of our owners can say the same thing.
Yeah. Some of them, they get one phone call. They might have one tenant and say like, I don't want to deal with the phone calls. I got a phone call at 2:00 in the morning. Like, why are they calling? Like, that's what time they're available to call. You know?
And that brings us to another thing. I mean, we kind of skipped over, but maintaining the property, we have a whole maintenance program, maintenance systems in place to where we're dealing with those phone calls. You're not getting leaky toilet calls as long as you stay out of it as an owner, because some owners try to get back into it. We have a few of those that we have to kind of say, hey, you're paying us to do this. Let us handle it, And so Emily's been a really good job. We've done a really good job at that. So
I even have some owners too that want to do their own maintenance. So they'll come in and they'll say, hey, I have these properties, but I don't want them to know that I'm the owner.
Yes.
So we say, hey,
that's the key right there.
Absolutely. Because then that's when you start hearing the sob stories and, the different things about, and you starts pulling on your heartstrings, you know, what do I do? So for my owners that, want to do their own maintenance, because that is a place, if you're handy and you can do those things, why not save some money doing that? And if that's the case, we have in our software system, we can just assign them, set them up essentially as a vendor. So not only are they an owner, but they're a vendor as well. And we can assign that work order out to them specifically. And then the tenant just thinks it's another contractor that's going out there to do work on their property.
Right. Yeah.
So
we've got all the systems in place, and as you can tell, Emily is very buttoned up. And listen, don't let the beautiful exterior fool you. She can be hard on those tenants. She is not cutting them any slack. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about her. So
absolutely. There's a fine line to walk.
Yeah. Well, you do it very well. So.
Well, thanks.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for joining us today. I love having you in my world, and I really appreciate all that you do for me and all of our owners too, because it really is a blessing to me to be able to, when an owner comes to me and says, hey, I have this problem, say, hey, listen, I got somebody that you need to meet,
Absolutely.
So thanks, Emily.
No problem. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks for joining us today on the Will Frederick Podcast, where we talk about real estate, wealth building, money, and life.